focused initially on kind of leadership principles around AI. And then the bit that everybody's here for is the AI governance element. Unfortunately, I'm joined by Steph and Jess, who are extremely passionate about this. And I will probably represent the business person's view of the topic at times, because I think it's always a tricky topic. Data governance has been tricky, AI governance has been tricky. So how do we actually bring it to life in the right way? And that's where Pendle come in. So my name is Greg Freeman. I'm the CEO and founder of Data and AI Literacy Academy. Hopefully some of you know us and know of the work we do. But I will hand over to Steph and then to Jess to introduce themselves as well.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm one of the founders of Pendle, and as Greg said, we focus a lot on AI governance as well as supporting other businesses through the end-to-end life cycle of AI. My background, if it wasn't any more boring, I was actually a chartered accountant for 15 years and still am. So, just to layer it on top of that. And then moved over into the world of data and AI about 5 years ago, where I led the data and AI function at Halfords, which is a large retailer over here in the UK. Then went to do a master's in AI at Oxford, and then met Jess, and then the rest is history in terms of founding Pendle. Jess?
Thank you. You're always a really tough act to follow, but I'm the other half of Pendle. So prior to Pendle, spent a lot of my time in data analytics transformation programs across the FTSE 250. So slightly ahead of the AI conversation, but fundamentally understand the difficulties of people, process, and technology coming together to solve problems.
And is Australian, so probably isn't
yes.
as bothered as me and Steph are by the horrific temperatures. For anybody who is America based, it's about 95 at the moment, and we don't have aircon. So that's the kind of existence we are facing right now. For a little bit of relativity.
Greg, I may as well be wearing a jumper. This is
100%. It's barely even worth recognising that it's hot, right? So apart from my dog's walking around in a wetsuit so that she doesn't get too warm. This is what it all comes back to, right? There's still a huge and increasingly evidenced narrative that companies, especially enterprise organizations, because of the scale of the challenge, because of the scale of including so many people in the problem and the solution, are really struggling to achieve value from AI. And on the flip side of that is a handful, and it really is a handful at 4%, but just I think you get the feeling for that when you're in organizations as well. It's really a very small number that have developed really kind of cutting edge capabilities that are horizontal, that are kind of moving and changing the needle for the somebody's got a dog barking.
Just my dog. She's the star guest, but I am going to jump in on this slide when you.
Okay, fine. Developed to actually get to the cutting edge of rebuilding business models, rebuilding operating models, changing the way we work. It's a really, really low number right now. And a lot of that does come down to a willingness to be well governed and designed. But really, there's many, many factors here. And Jess is gonna jump in and talk a little bit about their experience there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to sort of flag that this is, kind of a red herring. So from what we see is that 99.99% of organizations don't need cutting edge technology. They don't need to be on the face of it. And I think that can sometimes cause a bit of decision paralysis in people. If I can't be the best at this, or if I can't be the first, then I'm going to wait and see what happens with the market. But actually, where the value genuinely lies is a deep understanding of your business, which no cutting edge technology can actually solve for you. And when you have that understanding as a business and as a leadership team, you can then make educated guesses and hypotheses about the technologies that actually you do need to care about, which may be nascent, but they also may just be standardized automation that's existed for the last decade. It's just about being able to deeply understand the connection that potentially the market direction has in the context of your business.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair point. I had a conversation a couple of days ago. I think it was either Monday or the back end of last week, where somebody said, well, our concern is that we hear about all these large technical companies really adopting this at scale, and we feel very far behind. And I said, actually, most enterprises are where you are. Yes, there are the likes of Meta and Amazon who are ahead of the game, but they're ahead of the game because they own the infrastructure to be ahead of the game, right? Actually, the reality is that for most people, they don't need to be at the cutting edge, Jess, as you said. It's really like, how do they solve that challenge to make it value driving for them that we want to talk about today. I'm immensely biased in this statement, but I do think, from looking at my previous career, looking at the work that we are involved in more holistically within kind of end-to-end programs, I will go with technology should be the easy part. I'm not sure all partners make it the easy part, but technology should be the easy part. It's the harder stuff is the culture and the behaviors and the actions that individual Julie takes 10,000 miles away that you can't do anything about. That's the stuff that really is going to be the biggest impact on whether this is firstly successful, but also done in a risk managed way. And what's really interesting about this is that we often refer to a fairly well-known study which really concluded in the mid-2000s that a data strategy is technology, people, and process, right? Everybody knows that as the core breakdown. That found that 55% of problems in data projects were people problems. It looks as though the research is showing that AI, it's even more leaning towards people being the problem, because in a lot of cases, the technology is so easy to roll out and get right in some ways. But I think that's at the to a word that Jess used earlier really nicely, at this nascent stage. I think the technology is easy to roll out. You can give everybody Copilot if you want to. You can give everybody Claude if you want to. I think really where the change is afoot is when we're getting into these really kind of game-changing use cases. Actually doing the technology well is also extremely complex and needs all the right expertise, but a lot of businesses just need to get there. And so from our perspective, we absolutely believe that there's a people part to this, there's a change management part to it. Data quality is a people problem, not a technology problem in most cases. 95% of your data will be inputted by human beings typically, unless you've got an Internet of Things play around your machinery, etc. So we need to get that bit right as much as we need to get the technology bit right. Obviously, Jess, Steph, you see as much of the technology side as you do the people side. So where are people starting to find the technology bits tricky?
So I'll let Steph speak at some point, I promise. Always happy to be an inspiration, Greg. So you're happy to take nascent and run with it. But, you know, we're not biased, right? So when we came into this business, we always knew that data was a fundamental, blocker or unlock to good AI systems. But what actually maybe Steph and I didn't quite anticipate is the interaction with people and how poignant that was going to be to the success or failure of even the most simple AI systems. And the reality and sort of what we've come to learn through a number of knotty problem solving and transformation programs is that the space that we're operating within when we say AI causes a big emotional reaction in a lot of people, and understandably, right? Because this is just a world of unknowns for a lot of people. And it also touches on the world that they've always known. And I think that the way that we have navigated this quite successfully with our leaders, as our stakeholders, is you need to deeply understand what people within your organization are fearful of. You need to deeply understand what it is that they enjoy about the roles that they have and the value that they add to your business. And you need to make sure that when you are introducing something like data or AI transformation, that you're not just solving a business case, you're absolutely considering how you solve a problem for the people that are ultimately going to be responsible for adopting or unlocking that system within your organization. So this is, to wholeheartedly agree with you, Greg. The technology change is exponential, So it's getting easier and easier as individuals and as businesses to, you know, at the speed of imagination, at the speed of thought, to introduce new technology capabilities. But actually, increasingly, what this is becoming is a psychology of teams. You know, how do you have a good organization? And a huge part of that, obviously, is literacy, right? You know, part of fear is misunderstanding. So just wholeheartedly agree, and it's completely aligned with what we're seeing in terms of the major blockers to success in this space.
Excellent. This is where Steph can get to speak. I'll hand over to Jess. I'll hand over to Steph instead of you this time when I've gone through this, because she has actually been an AI leader and can talk from a half a day. So okay, so what are we looking for when we think about strong AI leadership? So much of it is the non-technical stuff, I think, is the key component. I'm not seeing many highly technical leaders in the AI space all of a sudden. It's kind of like teams of experts working for very kind of well-planned operators, well-planned strategists, well-planned commercial people. And obviously, to get to the senior level in any business, you have to be all of those things. So I think that's the first thing to say, that we're not encouraging people here who want to move into the AI space. And I see a number of people in the chat who I would consider and probably consider themselves data people. If we've got data people, data leaders who are wanting to move into the AI space, it's going to be the non-technical stuff that's really going to set you apart anyway. But it's the ability to see things like are on the screen right now. So can you set a clear AI operating model? So can you define the way that the people, the teams, the technologies, etc., will be structured through your experts, so that you can communicate a clear plan for how you'll then go ahead and execute that? Embedding AI into existing work is seemingly proving to be easier than creating and reimagining work entirely. I have a bit of a premise that actually really the ones that are going to win with this are the ones that are not only able to embed it into their existing work, but actually like burn stuff down and redesign it, burn stuff down and rebuild it. And I know obviously Pendle's got some really interesting use cases where you've already done this. You've kind of completely reimagined the way that some customers are running their businesses, and I think that's what you've got to be able to do. So do you want to talk, Steph, about either of those points? But obviously there's some really exciting use cases that you've got that will bring it to life for people.
Yeah, so I'll comment on both of them if that's okay. So on the clear operating model, absolutely. So you need to approach this of, how are you going to drive that function forward to achieve the business's overall objectives, as well as like how you contribute to that. But that's the now. How you need to be establishing yourself as a leader is, what does it look like 3 years from now? And how are you then working backwards to set up your operating model to change over those next 3 years? So the technology is going to change at a rate that neither you or I can comprehend. If you think 12 months ago, 6 months ago, what was available in the market versus what is now is, astonishing. So I can hardly imagine what it would look like. So you've got to be a bit of a visionary and go, what could it actually look like? Agent bosses, Greg, we spoke about that last year. We've already implemented a few of those within organizations that we've been working with already. So that is here. So how are you setting that vision and then working backwards? So whichever tool you're selecting is interchangeable. You shouldn't be fixed ever to a tool. You need to design your operating model that could be a lift and shift out. And that's a real business risk, essentially, if you are significantly wedded to an architecture or a tool that you can't easily extract out of. And then thinking what that means for your people, your processes, the skills, and it will be a continuous journey. So it isn't literacy again once and done. It will be forever moving, forever changing. And how do you get the skills and the team that are like open and willing to change and go on that journey? So what is right now and what we design right now won't be right 18 months from now. We're going to be living in this consistently changing environment, and your operating model needs to reflect that. In terms of embedding AI into existing work, workflows, I fundamentally disagree in terms of this as kind of a strong AI leadership practice. I think tools like Claude, which I absolutely love, Jess will vouch for me, and other kind of co-pilots or things that are embedded in third-party tools, they are great for general kind of productivity gains. And I'll go back to my finance days, but Excel, no finance person can live without Excel. It's a core part of kind of how you do your job. But if someone came to you and went, how much time do you actually save by using Excel? Not loads, but it's just a core part of how I do my job. That is the same as how I see like AI tools being used as embedded into existing workflows. A nice kind of supportive productivity tool. The organizations that we see that get real value and benefits out of AI are the ones that completely redesign how they operate an existing process or processes. So, ones that we've done are looking at like the full end-to-end. So we've been doing some work on, I won't say R&D tax credits, another finance bit, but it's quite technical in terms of being able to write quite a complex report to submit back to HMRC. And that process used to take about 3 weeks, and still retaining a human in the loop, but through re-engineering that process, we've took that down to 1.5 hours. So it truly is transformational if you look at the full end-to-end process and then look at how do I reimagine this process with AI. So fundamentally, in its simplest terms, we talk about AI as process transformation, and that's how you get the biggest benefits. And then when you explain it to people like that, they're a bit like, oh my God, I don't really want to be involved anymore, but can you deliver that benefit? I'm like, absolutely. All this. Yeah.
100%. And I think that R&D tax credit example, obviously, like, hopefully nobody minds me talking about the fact that we have then used the client that you had for that process, right?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what the commercial brilliance of why this should work is, because they charged us exactly what they were going to charge us when it was 3 weeks, right? But now they are, I can't do that percentages because I've not got Steph's brain, but that's a lot more efficient, 1.5 hours versus 3 weeks of work. So like by having a deliverable that works for people and getting to the right result, but doing it through an AI first way, they've completely revolutionized their margins, their ability to make money, save money, etc. So yeah, that R&D tax credit example is huge, and finance is just ripe for that type of use case.
Mm-hmm. And it's just the you get the quality and the consistency. So if you have someone in your team who you know they're a top performer, and you just want to extract like how they do something in their brain to have it consistent against the rest of your team, redesign the process, and they would be kind of your knowledge bank. So we call it like a rubric, but how do you extract the brain and how they do something into your AI model?
Sounds slightly matrixy, but it's less painful, I promise.
We don't actually extract anything out. But, it's how do you, by re-engineering the process, you're able to enhance that quality to your top performer, and that top performer doesn't sleep, it doesn't eat, it doesn't moan, what it may do occasionally, but moan and groan and drift a bit. But it is fundamentally, for the people who are doing it right, completely changing how their business operates.
I think one thing or two things to add on to that as well is Rome wasn't built in a day. So sometimes sort of laying out like transformation can seem like a huge, big, undertaking, but it's truly, to use another metaphor, like eat the elephant one part at a time, right? So, it's a really good way to start to develop, and this is the second point, start to develop your governance principles, right? And your governance principles should truly be built off 3 things. It's your organizational culture, it's the regulatory environment that you may or may not be exposed to, and the legal frameworks that dictate how your business needs to operate. And so I think one of the big traps that a lot of UK-based businesses make, and there's lots of great regulation in certain states in the US, there's obviously really emerging regulation in the EU, but the UK has been accused of kind of having a bit of a blank spot here when it comes to AI policies or legislation. But actually, there are all sorts of governing laws that exist around UK businesses that dictate whether a decision that the organisation has made causes harm. And, you know, there is no distinction between whether that decision is human or technology. And these are some of the things that, you know, taking a small use case that's going to deliver demonstrable value back to the business can be a really good place to start to flesh out some of those boundaries that exist. You know, maybe they're unwritten, but they certainly exist within your organization. So when we start to think about, you know, the principles of good AI, it's very much the principles of good AI in the context of your organization, particularly where maybe you're not a regulated environment.
Awesome. I'll pick up these next two, just so I'm conscious of you guys having enough time to do the second half of this presentation. But this is really like the core people bits, which is how do you get your key people to be the ones that are sharing the workload and sharing the value across the organization. And increasingly, we are working with businesses to take a top-down approach. Top-down, bottom-up is obviously the overall approach, but without that top-down bit, without engaging non-execs, execs, C-1, C-2, C-3, you're just not going to have the willingness within the teams and departments to actually make the change. And when Steph talks so articulately about kind of like resetting and redefining processes and making, like, doing things a different way, the managers have to be on board with that, because there's going to be a level of, they've got their chiefdoms, they like having big teams, they like the fact that they get to tell their mum and their brother that they've got 40 people in their team now, and what you're probably saying over time is people are going to leave, we're not going to replace them. I mean, I've just had a call with one of the big logistics providers, and they said, like, they've not aimed to do any people replacement through the process. It's not been a case of that, but they've done a really high ROI customer process with AI, and as a result, 5 people have left through natural churn, and they've not had to replace them. That's where you'll get wins as a business, you'll get wins as a data and AI ROI case, but ultimately, there's a manager there in the customer team who's now got 5 less people that they used to tell people they'd got. So I think that's one of the things that you have to do, and that's why the change management element is so important. Equally along the change management, you've got to invest in that employee engagement and trust. Nobody wants to hear that this is going to replace their job. There is a lot of aggressive media out there about that, and there's a lot of like very forward companies who've kind of said that is what they're trying to do, and I don't think anybody in this room agrees that is the outcome we're aiming for. We're ultimately aiming to empower employees, to let them identify the parts of their job that they enjoy doing and want to do, automate and use AI for the rest, and then they actually get to do a job that they love every day, because there's a lot of people who get up and go to work and couldn't really name all the stuff they do in a day that they enjoy. So let's let AI do those bits, and let's make sure that's the message that's coming top down. AI literacy, for us, is a no-brainer. Just worth saying that we don't consider AI literacy to be a hard skills problem. We definitely do teach the buttons in Copilot, we definitely teach prompting, we definitely teach all those things, but actually it's around the surrounding mindset and behaviors where you need to spend most of your time. To Steph and Jess's point, the technology is moving so fast, unimaginably quickly is how I would describe it, and it was kind of referred to earlier. If we can't imagine what the future is going to look like in 18 months' time, we can't really train people on the technology that's going to exist in 18 months' time. So we've got to train them on the first principles, the behaviors, the mindsets, which makes them willing to take on a new tool, take on a new process, take on a new way of working. And that's what really good AI literacy is about. And please, please, please don't forget that data literacy is the foundation of AI readiness and AI literacy, because your people to understand AI, its outputs, what they can trust, what they can't, which we'll go on to in a second. They have to understand why data quality matters, why data governance, data management matters. So they should be one and the same, not separate streams. And just in the interest of transitioning into the Steph and Jess led phase, I'd love it if you guys talked to human oversight where risk matters, because obviously that is an element of kind of a governance infrastructure anyway. And then we'll move on to the core principles that you're going to speak to around the AI governance side of things.
Perfect. Shall I come in, Jess, and go through a bit of the human oversight? So I think there's a lot of confusion sometimes around human in the loop or human in oversight. And there's a bit of, well, it's got, human oversight, it's fine. But you'll see loads of stuff in the media at the moment where there's obviously a human in the loop, but they haven't done what they, were meant to do. And then, it's splashed over the headlines where, I don't want to get the wrong consultant wrong, but large consultancy said agentic AI creates this much money, and then all the references don't exist. There's a myriad of examples. How you actually get this right is creating friction in a process. So no doubt there are the tools out there to do everything autonomously. So agentic agents could build them frictionless, do everything that you wanted to do to run you kind of most of your whole entire life, basically, right now. But you wouldn't want to, and you wouldn't want that in your company either, because you have no real oversight or control when things do go wrong, because you will have edge cases. You will have anomalies that come up that will cause your business impact. And Jess will talk through in a minute on a scale of risk. So where you do have risk in your business, and that will be determined by, as Jess said, the culture, the regulatory environment that you operate in, and generally just kind of how your customers perceive your brand as well. You should be looking at how you build friction within the process, where something just can't automatically get through and get released into the ether, in the environment, without that human judgment, that human touch. And we'll speak a bit more about that as we go through some of our kind of principles of when we look at AI governance. Jess?
Yeah, so Greg, if you want to stop sharing your slides, we're going to swing over to mine. And this is the clunky bit we warned you all about ahead of time. So
I actually don't know how to stop sharing the slides completely.
I think there's a white button in the sort of middle button of the 5, the bottom of your screen.
The challenge is that I'm not sharing my. These are like uploaded slides.
Can you just present, Jess? I don't know if it.
Yeah, maybe you just take over.
Oh, now you're testing me.
We'll just ignore that this says AI leadership in practice at the moment.
Oh, we've got a dual screen. Oh, I think our secret helper is.
Sarah's getting involved in the background.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So essentially what we have done as Pendle is created 7 principles of AI governance. Now, these are taken from all of the global frameworks, because there's consistencies that exist, irrespective of whether you're looking at Japan or the US. Globally, there are some great governance principles that exist. And then there's also the ethical standards as well that sit around AI use. And this is where Steph has applied her brilliant expertise and distilled them all down to principles that we believe should apply or be considered as you're defining what governance looks like in your organization. So Steph, did you just want to give like a really high level summary of each of the 7 principles to you? Because I think people have heard transparency and they've heard fairness and they've heard sustainability, but what does it actually look like in a business context outside of a I'm just a good person context?
Yeah. I suppose the first thing to touch on is it's the reason why kind of we wanted to use the circle is that this should exist on a life cycle. So AI governance should never be looked at kind of a standalone and that's it. It's always on a journey at its moment in time from initial kind of conception. So, we're thinking about introducing AI into our business. What does that look like? What do we need to consider? Through model development, model monitoring, model retirement, and also including kind of the data elements in that as well, if you could bring data into it. So to go through really top level in terms of the principles, so transparency is all about how can I actually understand or explain to a layman, a non-technical person, how this AI actually works. So what is it actually doing in the black box that we generally call it, that nobody knows? Or how can we give transparency to as much of that black box as we're able to, so that we're able to understand the inputs that come in, the output that comes out, and what happens in that middle? And there's a number of different techniques and things that you can do about that. Some black boxes are always black boxes. They will never change because it's just third party kind of information that they're willing to share. And then there are other kind of models and things where that they are more transparent and more understandable and more explainable. So one of the principles that we look to and, is in all the NIST frameworks and global kind of good practice policies is how do you give that explainability all the way through any form of AI use case? And it's not always possible. I do need to say that, but you should try to layer in as much transparency and explainability as possible.
I think one of the things that I saw on this, Steph, which I thought was brilliant, and it was essentially like, what is a regulator looking at or an auditor looking at in terms of transparency? Like, how can you evidence that? And one of the brilliant examples I saw was that everybody from the board who has, potentially a legal responsibility for the AI systems that exist in the business, right down to the person that clicks accept or go on the AI system, they have to be able to, on one page, explain what the system does, what data it uses, what the risk of the system is, and who owns it. So who owns the benefit and who owns when something goes wrong. And that was one of the sort of best ways I saw, because, not everybody needs to be able to talk about it in technical depth, but everybody needs to have a, well-formed understanding of what it is and what it does. And, as everyone knows, if you're able to summarize something effectively, it tends to mean that you've got a very deep understanding or you've got a very good understanding of that topic area.
So Jess is way better at the examples. And so what we're kind of talking about is we've implemented like a really complex, actually, AI policy for a regulated organization. And actually that 64 pages that I've wrote, we've boiled down to 4 principles. And they're the ones that Jess has just said around what's the models that's used, what data went into it, all the other things. And the reason for that is when we've introduced that then back into the business in terms of their operating model, so enabling actually the AI policy, which most people never actually do, so check in your own when you go back and understand, actually, if I wanted to do this, how does it actually work with the AI policy? It protects them from any professional indemnity, retaliation from clients if they do kind of want to call into consideration, how have you used my data to create, the service that you are giving me? So now they've got full protection over their professional indemnity from that transparency. So thank you, Jess. Great example.
Always here to help.
In terms of fairness, so this really, when we talk about fair, I always lean to AI more in the HR or people space. So how is AI being used for recruitment practices, etc., for, even healthcare, because I don't want to teach people to kind of suck eggs, because I'm sure you all know, because of being in the data background, but large language models and a lot of the models are trained on historic data, which is biased because most of it is wrote by white British men. Close your ears, sorry, but it is, and that inequity and unfairness and bias is portrayed through the models in the LLMs that are output. So we always introduce some form of bias testing, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that to ensure that the output that is coming out isn't biased against kind of gender, demographic, etc.
I want to play the sort of pragmatic devil on the shoulder as well with this one. So this is also one that is more often than not dictated by the culture of an organization as well. So where, there is obviously hard lines that you can't be seen to, particularly in the UK, be employing biased employment practices. There are, a spectrum of bias and equity, inclusion, and that is often dictated by who you are as a business. Some businesses, care more about that stuff or care more about one of those segments than the others. And so a big part, like we said, of understanding which components of these 7 principles applies to your business and to what depth is going to enable you to actually build a governance framework that you will be able to operationalize, because it won't feel other to your business, and it's very much plugged into the way your business likes to operate or should operate today, rather than trying to meet a standard that maybe isn't applicable to you at the moment.
I think one of the things to be careful in this space is there are recruiters who say, well, bias exists already at the moment, and it does. You know, we've all got our own bias internally in terms of who we apply, what we like. People like to recruit people like them. The issue and why you need to be so careful in this aspect, and as Jess says, if you're aligning it to your culture, is you're implementing a perpetual bias that will exist far beyond your own individual bias. So this is when you start to come into ethics, and you know it can go quite deep and broad. So in terms of fairness, Jess is right. You know, it's got to adhere to employment law, but when you get under the skin of it, it can get quite complex and ethical. Accountability. So this one is just, you can't say the AI gave it me. It's AI's fault. It's the LLM's fault. You know, that kind of doesn't ring true with anyone anymore. So it always has to have a human that is accountable for the output, even if there's got some form of agentic output as well. And that can be done through a number of different ways. Safety. So of course,
sorry, just on that accountability one, a trap lots of businesses fall into. Everyone's accountable for AI. Everyone's accountable for the decisions that are made. That actually means that no one's accountable. If you don't have a name, if you've got to think about it, whose name goes on the lawsuit? And that is the extreme way to think about it. That forces the drama and the weight that should accompany that decision. And I think that a big piece of accountability is that it needs to be structural. It needs to be very well defined. And again, that's a key part of a good governance framework that you will actually be able to operationalize, because you've got people that exist within your organization that if things do go wrong, or if things go spectacularly well, they're the ones that are celebrated, but they're also the ones that are on the hook to explain how something has happened and be accountable for the outcome of that.
And it's probably worth saying that the accountability exists. Accountability may change at different stages in the process. But you know, having the conversations up front around accountability will definitely help support in terms of the building up of the framework. Safety. So I'm not going to spend loads of time on this, because with any system that you want to build, you need to make sure that it's secure and safe. You know, like any other form of tool that you're using within the business. And then within privacy, making sure that it adheres to all GDPR laws, that you've got consent to use the data, how long are you retaining the data. So there's obviously lots of legislation in terms of data privacy, data retention. A lot of this kind of is covered by regulation and best practice, and in terms of data rights. The hard bit within AI governance in this and data privacy is, I think there's a lot of unknowns across an organization. So how many people in your organization today will be putting company data into AI, not understanding the privacy risks or safety risks? So again, it all links back to kind of an education. How is your business starting to learn and understand around the impact that AI can have on these privacy regulations? Because these are regulations, not just a kind of a nice to have governance principle to make sure your best practice and deliver return on investment.
And I'd just add another little factoid in there to keep people up at night. I think that everybody is increasingly becoming more aware of don't plug your financials into a public, chat bot, right? But I think what people don't understand is, as a business, how those consumption layers are connected into your business. So there are examples of people being able to do, I'm not sure if this is, AI prompt injections, where say you have a chatbot that's there to do a very specific thing. I think there's a case study of McDonald's. McDonald's had an AI assisted chatbot. Someone was able to prompt inject it and use the LLM like you would any LLM, but it was also connected to some of their other data. So, you've got to be really, as an organization, literate in how your systems come together, the data that you're potentially exposing, not just by putting it directly in as, you know, Susan from accounts is plugging in the financial planning for the next 3 years, which is obviously the worst case. But, you know, is it connected to tables that tell you what salary data everybody has? And, you know, you've got a HR chatbot, but suddenly you can start querying what the CEO's last bonus was. You know, these are the kind of things that you need to consider beyond just that first layer of, don't put, you know, IP into ChatGPT public instance. But yeah, it's I think worth flagging.
Yeah, and probably the last thing to add on this is how many of you have actually assessed the privacy rights that your organization has from third-party systems. So there's a lot of lack of understanding around what are your data rights if you're using things like ChatGPT, consent, ownership, retention rights for how long they hold your data, how they use your data. Even if you've toggled off the thing that says, don't use my training data, don't use my data for training, it's quite complex. So again, you know, after today, I would first start to look at, even if you're not on a big AI journey, you will have AI in your organization in third-party tools. So really understand
your DPAs, your data processing agreements. Yeah. That's what you need to dig into. So, really fun reading.
Can I just feed in with a bit of relativity on that one? Because I think one of the things that would be really easy for a data or an AI leader in the room to do is say, well, you know, like we've got a legal team, we've got a risk team. The way I relate this is, we've always said data literacy and AI literacy are hard because you can't get a learning team to do it because they're not data and AI literate. They may know how to do learning, but I think your massive problem is you've probably gotten a data and AI illiterate, not that we call it that, but like that's the truth of it, legal team, risk team, etc. So you can't just fob it off to them because they're not good. They might understand the legal words, but they don't understand the implications of it. So it is a big thing that's going to take a lot of expertise, support, and that, like,
Absolutely.
I dare you to ask your legal team to write your data processing policies in your client contracts, because they won't, right? They'll bring in an SME to do it. And that's the biggest tell. I think that's a really good flag.
Human agency. So again, this is more around the AI doesn't replace your role. You know, there's still human judgment that's required, that you are still accountable for the output, as we say. So you can override, you can say something different to what the AI says, and that you have human agency over everything that's given. It shouldn't kind of be transferred over to the AI itself. And then lastly, just conscious of time, we focus a lot on sustainability. So there's a lot in the news around token use and the impact on kind of electricity and big data centers being built. So, you know, what is the right optimum way to build a solution or use a solution? So there's certain things and principles that you can do to minimize harm and impact. We've also kind of got the ethical principles in there, which really filter across all the circle. And
if there's any data governance, diehards in the audience, it's, one of the key ones is metadata. So, if you've ever been looking for a time for metadata to be a hero, it's now use. So your time is now.
Okay, super conscious of time because we've got 15 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead to this, and then we'll skip forward.
You can skip past that, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, we'll go to the demo. So Sarah's going to reverse out the slides so that you can share your screen, Jess, basically, and then we should be good to
go. Hey, there we are. All right. Okay, so hopefully we've managed to, obviously we went through a lot in that 7 principles. We've made it a beautiful diagram and Steph's explained it wonderfully, but there's a lot to comprehend there. I think the slide that Greg just flashed up around, any single use case can have 36 points of intersection on any one of those sort of governance lines, so 7 principles. So how do you, as a leader, actually lead in AI? And it's about, as Steph mentioned earlier, it's about having that foresight. and building in the structures that are going to enable you to, well, enable your team to stay the course, whilst also enabling your business to rapidly pivot, adopt, and change as your business needs change. And so this, what we've got here is literally how you start AI governance. This is literally first principles of AI governance when you're looking at either a use case or an entire revolution when it comes to AI transformation within your business. One of the major challenges that we see to good AI governance is that nobody is speaking the same language. So you've got all sorts of people that exist across the organization that are being pulled into these decisions, and they have varying degrees of technical prowess. You know, maybe they go and build, you know, like some of the CEOs we encounter who go and build stuff at the weekend, you know, vibe coding, they're really into it. And then you maybe have a non-executive board who genuinely don't know how to challenge some of these decisions. And so this, your really straightforward 4-step framework enables that consistent conversation across the organization when you're talking about introducing AI into your business. But it also starts to enable you to build out and flesh out some of those core principles that are ultimately going to define what we hope would become, you know, a structured AI governance approach within your organization. So the first one is, what problem does this actually solve? And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I mean, how many people, I assume, you know, loads, are getting from the top, you've got to use AI because we heard that somebody else is using AI, or if we don't use AI, you know, I'm being asked why am I not using AI from the investors, AI. And then you've got an organization sitting underneath you going, well, why do we need to use AI? We've worked perfectly well for the last 20 years. You know, why do we need to introduce AI into our business at all? And so I think everybody needs to be very, very clear that this solves a problem, and what problem does it actually solve before you start considering tools or systems that you're going to introduce into your business, or even bringing AI into your business. And that needs to be well understood and agreed that you're all solving, or you all understand that you're solving, you know, a consistent challenge. The second is, what are the dependencies? So this is what ultimately should define your feasibility. If you've got dependencies on being able to solve this challenge that you can't unlock, well, then it's not feasible for your organization. It should naturally deprioritize, or you should have a very clear understanding of the things that you need to unblock or mature rapidly within your organization if you've decided that the answer to number one, the problem that it's actually going to solve for the business, increases its importance, and therefore, you know, you create the business case to start unblocking some of those dependencies. That very much depends on data, people, and technology. And fundamentally with people, it's typically going to be their literacy and the change journey that they're going to have to go on. And third is, how do you actually follow that use case end to end and assess it as you're going through that process to ensure that it is actually staying the course, that it is actually doing what you thought it was going to be doing, and that it is achieving that business case that you put forward, or that problem set that you put forward that it was set to solve. And then the fourth is, like we've talked about a lot, is who is accountable for it. And like Steph said, it's not necessarily that there's one person that's accountable right at the end and they need to be across every component of this AI system or this AI tool. It's very much, who are the people that are accountable at what stage, what are their names, how are they accountable, and how do they have the tools and the agency to be able to maintain that accountability and that understanding and change things if actually they're not happy with how they're operating. And so what we've done, and this is available to everybody, I'm sure we'll send it around. We can even put it in chat. This is publicly available on Pendle, pndl.ai. So this is a prioritization framework. So for AI use cases that you can start to map out yourself. So what we've done, and this isn't the answer to everything, this is really just a start of a 10. What we've done is preloaded some of the common use cases that we see across a broad spectrum of industries. And this starts to layer that framework over some of these common use cases. So I think one of the ones that Steph mentioned earlier was around AI in recruitment. So if you took something like an AI screening tool, which is very, very common, I think even if people are using outsourced tools or outsourced recruiting functions, you will see this a lot. But just because it's outsourced doesn't necessarily mean that you're not accountable for it. So this is something that you should consider, even if you've bought something in, and this is what this framework will allow you to start to map out. But you can start to go through and say, okay, well, why would I introduce something like this? What problem does it solve? It's like, okay, well, time to hire, right? Really simply, time to hire. I can't, my team can't, or, you know, it makes it very expensive for my outsourced provider to go through hundreds of CVs. So this is a really quick answer for us to get to the really good CVs really, really quickly, so we can prioritize our time and effort on that. You go through the framework, and then what we can also do as part of this feasibility board is start to, drag, don't click, is start to map out for your business where this sits on high value, low value, and feasibility. So like I started to talk about, you need to consider as part of this, what are the dependencies that exist within your organization? So do you have your culture defined? Number one, that's going to determine how you go about screening and what you look for in new candidates. Do you have the people that are able to monitor this tool? Do you need to go and build something yourself? Do you have the time and the skills to be able to go and procure something like this? And do you have your AI policy in place that allows you to measure the tools that maybe you'll bring in against your standards and your governance structure? So say here we take AI recruitment and talent, AI in recruitment and talent acquisition. So we say that we're going to buy something, because actually there's loads of good things that exist on the market, and we're not a recruitment company, so we're probably not going to spend a whole bunch of money and time building something like that. What we've done is, if you click into any one of these use cases, you can start to see that framework layered over the top. And this changes based on whether it's buy or build. And so I think this is a very good start of a 10 when you're starting to map out priority. You know, as you start to lay out the use cases on this 4x4 grid, you'll start to see the things that you should be prioritizing based on their value, based on their feasibility, which is determined by the dependencies. And then you can start to think about the governance that you lay over the top with that 4-part framework. But yeah, as I said, this is available to everybody. It's very context dependent to your organization. Some of these use cases are going to really heavily apply to some people and not to others. But you can start to see how that framework actually operationalizes when you're thinking about introducing AI systems into your business. Yeah, that's it for the demo.
Awesome.
Play around, go have a look.
Sarah shared it. I've shared it as well, to be fair, so I didn't see that Sarah had shared it. But it's in there. You can click on it. It's easily accessible.
I think on this, what I would say, and to go back to your points at the beginning, Greg, that I fundamentally disagreed with in terms of, embed AI in the process. All of these that we're showing you are as they're re-engineered business processes. So these are looking at, if you are to, not rip up the script, but, look at a process and look how you can improve, redesign and embed it. These are the things that I would be going out to look at as a starter for 10. So, in terms of when we look at AI use case and feasibility, we're probably looking at like 100 different type of metrics that we would look at to assess whether an AI use case is right for you, or how feasible or how valuable it would be. But as you go through the problem, dependencies, assessment and ownership, it'll give you a really good idea. Because one of the things that I find a lot of people struggle with, especially if they haven't come from a finance background, is identifying what actually is the value. So in there, we'll give you a lot of examples for each of the different use cases of, like, commercially, actually, what does value mean in a recruitment context? What does value mean in a pricing context? What does value mean in a data management context? And it's always financial, and there's always a way to write back to financial. But the first point, some people don't know, well, what is the metric that leads me to the financial number? And this really helps with that as a starter for 10. So if for nothing else, I would say it's a good way just to have a look through those and look on the assessment bit, and it will give you some kind of handy KPIs that you could look for some of these common use cases.
Also, just very quickly, you can actually use this as a prioritization and print it off. So you can start to classify things in buy or build, and then you'll get that download of the sort of risk consideration, or the governance considerations that you need to have for each of them. But yeah, enjoy, always open to feedback as well on this. But in this space as well, you'll see that we've dived into a bit more detail for some of those use cases. So we've laid out, I think, 4 of the use cases there that you can go and dig into to actually sort of see how you would have a conversation as a business, and lay it over a couple of different topics. It's quite easy to see the patterns.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So just in terms of how Data and Literacy Academy and Pendle are going to be working together, something that we haven't really touched is that very, very senior layer. And this is a really, really kind of like non-execs, large accountability, name on the door type of problem. And what we've been doing to make the relationship with Pendle work is, as we're designing data and AI literacy programs across organizations, obviously we go from like ground zero, kind of like frontline workers, all the way through to your everyday execs, is if there's been a high priority need in governance, compliance, real senior leadership around how to do AI well and bringing those types of people up to speed, then Steph and Jess are the people that we've been bringing into those conversations. So for us, it's a really exciting time because it's so important that the people at the very top of every organization understands what this means for them and therefore what it means for their organizations, and as well as obviously the types of use cases that Pendle are able to deliver, etc. There's a huge opportunity to work with them and just make sure that you're in the right place as a business. I see some of the organizations that are on this call right now. There's a lot of regulatory responsibility in those environments, and making sure you're tip-top shape and everybody else around you knows that is going to be as important as anything. Thank you so much to everybody for dialing in. We will give you 1 minute of your life back and wrap up there. But if you've got any questions, myself, Steph, Jess are all on LinkedIn, as you can imagine. Often post more than some people are connected to want us to. So that might become part of your way. But other than that, you can definitely get in touch with us via LinkedIn or obviously via Pendle's website or Data and AI Literacy Academy's website. Have a really good rest of your very warm Wednesdays, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.